Hi everyone, my name is Archana. I'm an attorney and communication coach, and today we're going to be talking all about verbal fillers. One of the questions that I get asked the most frequently as a communication coach is, how do I stop saying How do I stop saying like? Everybody wants to learn how to stop saying all of these distracting words like like, so, and you name it. There are even phrases that people use constantly in their speech because they're uncertain about what they're going to be saying. They might be nervous, or it just might be that they're unfamiliar with the material that they've been asked to present on. And so when all of this happens, all of these verbal fillers, these sounds, words, tiny phrases, they come up, causing distraction for your audience because you're stumbling over your words. The good news for you is there is a tested and proven method that you can use to remove these from your speech, and that is exactly what I'm going to be sharing with you in the video today. It's a 5-step plan, and if you practice this, I guarantee that you will be able to gain control over your verbal fillers no matter what they are and finally remove them from your speech. The very first thing that you want to do as you begin to assess your verbal fillers is record. What do I mean by that? You're going to have to grab your cell phone, grab your iPad, grab your camera, whatever you've got with you, and you want to take a 2-minute recording of you speaking. Now, while it might not take any fancy equipment to do this, the one thing that it will take is for you to have an understanding about what makes you feel uncomfortable. Is there a particular setting in which you're uncomfortable? Is there a topic that you're not very comfortable speaking about? Is there something that makes you nervous because you've never practiced it before? Those are the types of things that you want to speak to in this recording. And the reason for that is that we don't want you to have perfect speech here. We want you to actually be uncomfortable, because it is in that setting that you will actually elicit the verbal fillers that you want to be combating. And we need to know what they are before we can address them. So in this first step, take a 2-minute recording of yourself on whatever device you've got, and then we'll move on to step number 2. Step number 2 is all about the review, and I know that this can be the most painful step for some of you, because what it involves is you going back and taking that recording from step number 1 and watching it back. I know. It's hard, but you've got to do it. It's the most important part of any communication practice. You have to know what you're dealing with. So when you do a review, I encourage you to do a twice-over review. In the first round, you're just assessing what the problems are. So as you listen to your recording the first time, think about all the different words that you're saying that are causing distraction in your speech. Are you starting every sentence with the word and? Are you saying a little bit, a bit too much? Are you saying so frequently because you're pausing and you need something to fill the silence? What are all of your specific verbal fillers? Take them and write them down in a list. And then you could do your second review. In the second review, what you want to do is pay attention for all of those words that you already addressed in the first review and take a tally of how frequently they're happening. Once you know the frequency, you'll know the real problems in your speech, and developing this type of awareness is exactly what's going to help you in the future to stop saying these types of words. Step number 3 is called replace. What you're going to do in this step is do the same exact speech that you did in step number 1 and record it again. The only difference is going to be that this time you are going to do it with the awareness that you developed in step number 2. So as you're recording yourself giving this speech, make sure that you pay attention, and any time that you want to use those characteristic verbal fillers that you have a list of, make sure that you do not use those words. Instead, fill the space with silence. This can be difficult for some people because some people have a troubled relationship with the concept of silence, but let me tell you that silence is 100% okay even when you're public speaking. And the reason for this is that if you fill a space with verbal fillers, it causes distraction. But if you fill a space with silence, it gives your audience a chance to digest what you have just said. So they don't perceive silence the same way that you would as a speaker. The other thing that comes into play is that as you fill a space with silence, it allows the audience to actually feel that you're creating organically rather than speaking from something that's scripted. And when they feel like they're part of this organic creative process of you coming up with the ideas of what you're speaking to, they feel like they're part of it, and everyone loves that, and that builds connection. So don't be afraid of silence. Record yourself again, pay attention for those verbal fillers, and fill your spaces with silence rather than distraction. In step number 4, we're going to talk about retaining or removing silence. In the last step, we started building on our awareness, using it to speak more thoughtfully, and replacing our verbal fillers with silence. But sometimes silence is not the most appropriate for the situation. Now, if you're using verbal fillers in areas where there would be a natural comma, period, or punctuation, silence might be the right thing to use and replace your verbal filler with. But if you are using verbal fillers in the middle of phrases and sentences, it might seem weird if you replace that verbal filler with silence. So as you continue to practice, replace your verbal fillers with silence, but then have a second step of practice where you consider, is this silence appropriate? Does it sound okay? If silence seems like it's appropriate in that moment, then you can preserve it and retain it. Or if silence seems like it's kind of awkward in that moment, then you can learn to preserve your flow by practicing your material even more, and that will allow you to progress through the sentence without using your verbal filler or silence. The final step in removing verbal fillers from your speech is to reflect. With any bad habit, I think that doing a fair amount of introspection is necessary, and verbal fillers is just the same. I don't think that verbal fillers are happening in a vacuum. Generally speaking, if you're using verbal fillers in your speech, there's something deeper there. So you want to start asking yourself some really pointed questions. Very generally speaking, these questions would fall in the categories of, why are my verbal fillers happening? When are they happening the most frequently, and what settings are bringing out my verbal fillers the most? When we're looking at the question of why, you want to think about why these verbal fillers are happening. Are they happening because of nerves? That tends to be the most common reason why people use verbal fillers. So you want to go deeper and think about, why are you nervous in this setting? What are the things that can make you more comfortable? What would make it easier for you to take the time that you need to breathe and speak and not use the verbal fillers that you are relying on to make you feel more comfortable? The second question is all about, when are your verbal fillers coming out the most frequently? Is there a time of day? For example, if you're more tired, are you using verbal fillers more in that situation? Or is there a topic that makes you more uncomfortable and so the verbal fillers come out more often? Is there a type of exercise that makes verbal fillers not show up as frequently? Or is it that if you speak about something more casual, then you don't feel like using verbal fillers as much as when you want to talk about something academic that's more intellectually based? Okay, so you want to start thinking about those questions and if they play a role in why your verbal fillers are coming out. And finally, in the same realm, we want to think about the settings that might bring out your verbal fillers the most. I have clients that do well in different types of settings. People might be better on camera, or people might be better on stage. And these different types of settings might actually bring out different verbal fillers, or maybe in a certain situation you don't use verbal fillers at all, and then you go into social media and suddenly you find yourself using every other word. It just depends on the situation, what you're comfortable with, what you've had the most exposure to. So start thinking about all of that and thinking about ways that you can start incorporating the right types of exercises into your verbal filler practice. This being said, I wanted to let you know about a resource that I've put together that's absolutely free, and it's called the Verbal Filler Bootcamp. So if you sign up for my email list, you'll get free access to this mini course. It's all about verbal fillers. We do an in-depth dive into what they are, how to go about removing them from your speech. We go into these 5 steps that I've talked about in this video in even more detail. And then I've given you curated exercises that I've used with all of my clients that have helped them really target specific issues with their verbal fillers so that they can finally gain control and remove them from their speech. So if that's something that you're interested in, please feel free to look down in the description box so you can sign up for my email list and gain access to the course. If you've made it this far in the video, then I want to share with you my #1 rule when it comes to removing verbal fillers from your speech, and that is do not remove all of them from your speech. I know that seems so crazy coming from a communication coach, but it's true. If you remove all of the verbal fillers from your speech, it can kind of sound not human, and that's not what we're aiming for here. We want to sound like we're human, like we're authentic, and that we're having a conversation. So having a few verbal fillers in your speech, it's just fine. What I actually want to encourage you to do is that when you're practicing, that's when you want to aim for perfection. That's when you don't want to be using verbal fillers at all and be really strict with yourself. But when you're in the field, if you catch yourself using verbal fillers, that's just fine, because likely the person who's listening to you is just finding it very conversational and okay. And if you go back in this video, you're going to notice I've been using verbal fillers throughout, and I think that's fine. I mean, I could go back and I could try to perfect it, and that's, you know, something that I've been trained to do. But at the end of the day, that's not how humans speak, and that's not what people are used to hearing. So you do not have to have that type of pressure where you think that all of the verbal fillers need to be gone. It's just that we want to remove enough of them so that there isn't distraction in the speech. So when you listen to yourself back, if you feel like you're getting distracted by the words that you're saying, maybe you have a bit more to go. But if you feel like you're doing just fine and that you're getting your message across and that's the thing that's really shining, that's your sweet spot and that's where you're aiming for. So we don't need to be perfectionists when it comes to communication. We just want to sound human. It's always something to remember. So if you have verbal fillers in your speech because of the fact that you're a human, if you have a stutter, just embrace it all. It's totally fine. People are used to it. You don't want to remove everything from your speech. It's only when we're practicing that we're caring about that level of perfection. So to review the 5 steps that you're going to be taking to remove the verbal fillers from your speech, they are: #1, record yourself. #2, you want to review that recording twice. You want to first find out what verbal fillers you are currently using, and then the second review will allow you to see the frequency with which you're using those verbal fillers. The 3rd step in removing your verbal fillers is to replace your verbal fillers with silence and gain awareness and like actually pay attention to what you're saying for once in your life. And then the 4th step would be to think about whether you want to retain or remove those silences that you've now inserted into your speech. So once you've done all of that, you can take on the final step, which is to reflect on why these verbal fillers are even happening and see if you can create a more targeted approach with the exercises that you'll continue to include into your communication practice, which you can find in the Verbal Filler mini course on my website. So thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you in the next video.